Let's begin with the roots of the French Revolution, particularly the role of the monarchy and the economic strains on France. The monarchy, with Louis XVI at the helm, was already a system of divine right. But Louis XVI didn't start the problems leading to the revolution, he inherited them.
Inherited problems, huh? Sounds like every time I buy a used tractor.
A weirdly apt analogy, Henry. And that irresponsibility continued with Louis XV, who engaged in the costly 7 Years' War against Britain and its allies. He was following the reigns of Louis XV and the Sun King, Louis XIV. Louis XIV's era was marked by wars and the extravagant construction of Versailles Palace. The palace's maintenance alone was a financial black hole.
Spending a fortune on a fancy house while the country's in debt? That's just irresponsible.
And that irresponsibility continued with Louis XV, who engaged in the costly 7 Years' War against Britain and its allies. This war was a disaster for France, leading to significant territorial losses and further economic burdens.
It's like a chain of bad decisions, one after the other.
Precisely, Mary. And when the American Revolution began, France, still bitter towards Britain, spent over 1.3 billion livres supporting it. By the time Louis XVI was in power, France was drowning in debt, over £3 billion.
That young king was dealing with quite a mess.
Indeed, and the economic situation worsened in the 1780s. Despite attempts at reform, the monarchy's inefficiency and the unfair tax system exacerbated the crisis. The nobility and clergy were mostly tax-exempt, leaving the burden on the common folk.
So the rich stayed rich, and the poor got poorer. Sounds familiar to my ears.
Yes, Henry. This imbalance created a deep resentment among the populace, setting the stage for unrest.
It seems like a tough situation, needing money but unable to get it fairly.
And this was just the beginning. The financial mismanagement under the monarchy was a major catalyst for the brewing revolution. Moving on, let's discuss the unfair tax system and the stark social inequality that fueled the flames of the French Revolution. In France, society was divided into 3 classes: the clergy, the nobility, and the common people. The tax burden fell disproportionately on the common folk, who comprised about 97% of the population.
You're telling me the rich folks didn't pay taxes?
The nobility and clergy enjoyed tax exemptions and lived in luxury, while the commoners struggled under heavy taxes. This system created deep resentment.
It's like watching your neighbor feast while you're starving and still having to pay for their dinner.
An apt metaphor, Mary. The government's attempts to reform the tax system under Louis XVI were ineffective. Advisors like Robert Turgot and Jacques Necker proposed changes, but they were met with strong resistance from the nobility, who were unwilling to relinquish their privileges.
Just like some rich CEOs today, always blocking what's good for the little guy.
These failed reforms highlighted the king's weakness and inability to enforce changes, intensifying public anger. There was a growing awareness among the people, especially in the burgeoning middle class, about the social injustices.
What kind of injustices?
The privileges of the nobility and clergy were stark. They owned a significant portion of the land and held most administrative positions. The middle class, despite becoming wealthier and more educated, had limited access to power.
That's so unfair. It's like their voices didn't matter at all.
And the spread of Enlightenment ideas only fueled their desire for change. Now, let's delve into the economic crisis in more detail and explore how Enlightenment ideas were the intellectual fuel for the revolution. The 1780s saw a severe economic downturn in France. Crop failures led to food shortages and skyrocketing prices. The common people, especially farmers and workers, were hit hard, spending a huge portion of their income just on bread.
Spending most of your earnings on bread? That's no way to live.
Indeed, Henry. Imagine the working class spending over 80% of their income on basic food. It was a dire situation.
Such hardship, it's heartbreaking.
And amidst this economic hardship, the ideas of the Enlightenment were spreading. Thinkers like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Montesquieu were advocating for liberty, equality, and democracy. These ideas resonated deeply with the educated middle class, the bourgeoisie, who were growing in wealth and influence.
Ideas are like seeds: plant them in the right soil, and they'll grow into something big.
Exactly, Henry. These ideas questioned the divine right of kings and the existing social hierarchy. They encouraged people to think critically about their government and societal norms.
So, people started seeing things differently, wanting change.
The Enlightenment was like a light shining on the inequalities and injustices of the time. People began to question why the nobility had so many privileges while they suffered.
Makes sense. You start wondering why some folks get all the breaks while you do all the hard work.
And this intellectual awakening, combined with the harsh economic realities, created a volatile mix. The French people were ready for change, and the seeds of revolution had been firmly planted.
It's like a storm brewing on the horizon, all these elements coming together.
Precisely. The economic crisis, social inequality, and the spread of revolutionary ideas were converging, setting the stage for one of history's most significant revolutions. We've now come to the tipping point, the events that directly led to the French Revolution. The economic and social pressures we discussed earlier were immense. But what truly pushed France to the brink was the government's inability to effectively respond to these crises.
A government's got to do something when folks are struggling, not just sit on its hands.
Precisely, Henry. The French government under Louis XVI was marked by indecision and inefficiency. The legal and administrative systems were chaotic, with different laws in different regions and a lack of coordination among government officials.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
This dysfunction became glaringly obvious when the country faced severe food shortages. The government's failure to manage the crisis led to rampant rumors and distrust. People believed the monarchy and nobility were deliberately exacerbating the crisis for their gain.
Spreading rumors in tough times, that's like throwing gasoline on a fire.
And amidst this turmoil, Louis XVI made a crucial decision, to convene the Estates General in 1789. This was an assembly representing all three classes: clergy, nobility, and commoners, which hadn't been called together for over 175 years.
Why call it after so long?
Louis XVI was desperate for solutions to the financial crisis. He hoped that by bringing together representatives from all estates, he could force the nobility to pay taxes.
Let me guess, that didn't go as planned.
You're right, Henry. The calling of the Estates General set off a chain of events that the monarchy couldn't control. It gave the common people, the Third Estate, a platform. This assembly became the spark that ignited the revolution.
So, it was like opening a door they couldn't close again.
Precisely. The Estates General of 1789 became the catalyst for the French Revolution. It was the moment when the pent-up frustrations over inequality, economic hardship, and the desire for political change burst into the open. And so, we reach the end of first part of our journey through the tumultuous times leading up to the French Revolution. It was a period where the confluence of economic hardship, social inequality, and the power of new ideas set the stage for dramatic change.
It's incredible. I never realized how many factors played into sparking such a monumental event. It's like a puzzle, where every piece was essential to the complete picture.
Yeah, and what gets me is how much of it seems, well, kind of familiar, you know? The struggles between the rich and the poor, the government's challenges, it's like history has a way of repeating itself.
The lessons of history are timeless, and they often echo into our present. Understanding them helps us to better comprehend our own world and, perhaps, the path we're on.
It makes you think how we, as individuals and as a society, must learn from the past to build a better future.
Reading history isn't just about the past, it's a mirror reflecting our own lives and choices.
Makes you want to make sure you're on the right side of history.
I hope our discussion has been as enlightening for you as it has been enjoyable for me. But be prepared, our next talks would get more intriguing and much more dramatic.